Now I want to introduce you to another variation on the basic technique. It's something I've called the conical structure because quite simply it makes a single structure that can be slightly cone-shaped or rounded. You can see the Morning Glory flower here is definitely cone-shaped. I've got another example here in this cactus, slightly more rounded. And the reason I want to show you both is to illustrate how you need to be aware of the difference between reverse wrapping and the normal wrapping. For the Morning Glory flower, you can see both the back side and the front side of the flower are going to be visible. So inevitably on one side you've got visible wire. Hence knowing which way round you're wrapping to know which side you're making that wire visible. And with the cactus, it's much easier because the visible wire just goes inside the structure. So just bear that in mind as we go along. I'm going to put those to one side now and we'll actually start on the technique. So I've threaded my beads onto my spool of wire, but before I did that, I also cut off 4 lengths of wire. Now they are going to be roughly 3 inches for the actual strut that you're going to be wrapping around, plus another length to go on the stem. So because this is a corsage, the stem length isn't too long. It might be longer if you were making a full flower. We'll come back to those in a minute. The technique actually starts off in much the same way as usual. The only difference is you don't want to slide any row 1 beads up your wire. So keep all the beads down towards the spool. And we're going to create the loop as usual. But this time you want to leave a good length of wire at the top. And we're just going to make that twist to hold the loop in place. Again, just twist 3 or 4 times, just enough to actually hold everything firm, but you don't want too much twisting here. And I'm also just going to trim that knot off because we're not going to need that for the next bit. So that gets you set up to begin with, and the next step is to add in the struts of wire. So take the struts one at a time, and you want to line up the top of the strut you're adding with the top of the piece of wire above your loop, and just twist that strut in around the loop wire. Try and get it as firmly held as you possibly can. Now add in the next one, and again line up the top as near as possible. It doesn't matter if it's not 100% precise, we'll sort all that out at the end. And we've got a 4th strut, again that twists in. Want to make sure that they're twisted firmly enough that if you try pulling on them they're not going to come out, so that's okay. And the final strut goes in place and just twists in. This twisted area is going to end up on the stem of the flower, so keep it as neat as you can, but it will be covered up later. And the next step is just to arrange your struts so they're sitting out roughly in a circular fashion. Straighten them all out, and we're ready now to actually start adding on our beads. Now I'm not going to lie to you here, the first couple of rows of this technique are a little bit tricky. You want to start by just twisting the wire from the spool just once around a stem wire so that it's got a clear starting point. Then you're going to slide the beads along for the first section, and as I was saying, think about whether you're reverse wrapping or normal wrapping. So which is the front and which is the back. Now in this case I want this side to be the front side if you like, so I'm going to wrap across that first, around the strut and across again. Now this is going to feel very tricky, you'll feel completely fingers and thumbs because the struts all move, the wire all moves, and it's quite tricky to hold everything in place. You're going to take the same number of beads along, wrap in the same way around the next strut, and again same number of beads around your 3rd strut, and once more around the 4th strut, Remember each time to keep wrapping the same direction that you've started up. And again, you'll find the beads want to slide a little way up the struts as you wrap, so just try and keep them in check as much as you can. The struts end up going all over the place, but I'll show you in a minute. We'll just rebalance at the end of the row. So normally with the basic technique, every time you do a wrap around, we call it a row. With this, I'm referring to a row as completing 5 wraps around your 5 struts. So at the end of each row, just reposition your struts again and just get the beads in place. Now, to make the conical structure, each row you're going to increase the number of beads between the struts just very slightly. The pattern's going to tell you how many you need to do this by. And again, make sure you keep wrapping in the same direction as you go on. I'm just going to show you this next row. You'll find after about row 2 or 3, it gets a lot easier, because the more rows you've got, the more the struts start to actually hold their shape and stay in place where you want them to be. It's critical to make sure you remember where you are on the rows, so make sure you've got the same number of beads in between each of your struts. If you do lose count, then just check the number of beads you've got on the previous row underneath and make sure that you're putting the right number on top. And you can also check that you've got the same number of rows on this particular strut as your neighbours. So you can see I'm just finishing the 5th strut to complete my 2nd row here. Once again, just pull everything up into place, and hopefully you can see where we're going there. Now this is getting a bit more stable. I'm just going to keep on adding rows exactly the same way until we've got what we need for the flower. Right, so I've added all my rows, and you can see I've finished with this strut here. I just want to show you how to finish off. I've already twisted the spool wire along with the end of the strut wire and trimmed the wire from the spool. Now, the other strut wires are actually all fine for length here, but if they're sticking out longer, you want to trim them back so you've got about 1/2 centimetre or so overlap. As when you normally finish off a piece of basic technique, you're just going to fold all the strut wires down onto the wrong side. However, having said that, because you're also looking very much into the wrong side on this conical flower, I'm actually going to take my struts down over the outside. So I just mentioned that point because it's something you will want to bear in mind and use your discretion when you're actually using this technique. And you can bend the wires down in one direction or the other depending on where you think they're going to be less visible. So that gives a nice neat finish on the inner side, and they're also quite subtly placed on the other side if you're looking at the flower in that direction. So again, I've just cut the stem wires open as usual, and that's all ready now to add a centre and bind the stem.